So my pondering this week, as I've said many times, I tend to live in the question. Don't always have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions. My question this week for me, and I guess really for all of us, is, am I living by default? Am I living in a default mode, or am I living on purpose? And what I mean by a default mode is this mode that I can get into of where I do things habitually without even awareness that maybe that I'm doing them, and certainly not why I'm doing them. They're just ways that I've learned to be, things that I've learned to think, to say, to act. We talked a little bit about that last week. If you were here, Trish asked everybody to get up and change and choose a different seat. You know, because we come into a room, we're used to sitting in a particular place, and so that's where we sit. Nothing wrong with that, unless we decide there's something wrong with it. But we sometimes get into these living in default, living by default. And I like to think of that as like a computer, because computers come with default settings. We don't necessarily know what those settings are. Most of us don't. I mean, maybe I'm speaking for myself. I don't know a lot of times what those default settings are. And so those default settings are running behind the scenes, doing things for us, whether we're aware of it or not. And those default settings determine really how we get where we want to go sometimes, how we access different programs, what programs are accessed at certain times when we're using our computer. Most of us, if you're like me, you just think, I click on this thing and it's supposed to do what I want it to do. Or I go to the internet and I'm supposed to get where I want to go. And sometimes that works and sometimes it may not work. But most of us, if you're like me, maybe I should just be talking to myself, just assume that it's all good and there's no problem. I mean, it's all great. I don't really care. I just care that it works. How it works is not a problem to me, it's not a question to me unless something goes wrong. Until I'm at working and doing something and I recognize I can't get where I want to go, or I can't access the program that I really want to access. And then I might try to figure out, well, why is this not working? And that happened to me just the other day. We put out a weekly newsletter. If you're not getting that newsletter, we'd love to have you sign up for that. And somebody sent me an email and said one of the links to an email address is not working on our newsletter. And so I went to our newsletter and I clicked on it, and it looked like it went somewhere, but it didn't go anywhere. I'm like, well, what's going on with this? So I thought, okay, well, so I checked on a couple of other links in the email and the newsletter, and they worked. So I went to a website and I clicked on an email link, and it didn't go anywhere either. So I said, okay, well, let me just go to my laptop, because I know my laptop will do it. And so I went to my laptop, and it worked. So I realized, well, there must be something going on with my computer, my desktop in the office. So I contacted our IT guy. And he said, oh, yeah, it's just a simple solution. You do this, 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 and this. You change the default setting on your email. So you change it to Outlook, and then once you change that to your default setting, then it will work. It took 3 steps. It worked just like that. But I had no idea at first what was going on. The default program was being accessed behind the scenes, and I didn't know that. So what was happening all that time until somebody else had a problem with it was that I figured, oh, well, it doesn't really matter. I'll just figure a workaround. I'll go to my laptop if I need to. Or it doesn't really bother me, so I don't need to even deal with it. And I think that's sometimes the way our minds work as well. That we have these default settings in our minds. I think sometimes, almost always, those default settings are programmed in us by the time we are really old enough to even recognize any of that. We are really not in control of many of those default programs because they get programmed by our parents, by our culture, by our society, and they are running behind the scenes all the time, even when we're not aware of them, those default settings. And so a lot of times we're operating in default mode without even realizing it. And if you're like me, you don't even really begin to question those default settings until something goes wrong. Until you're not really not able to get where you want to go or access the program that you really want to access. And so very often I think we're operating in this default mode rather than living on purpose. And when we find out we're in this default mode, kind of like with our computer, what do we decide to do with that? Do we realize, well, it's working okay so far, I'll just let it go on, even though I'm not really getting what I want, even though I'm not really going where I really think I want to go. I don't really want to take the time or the energy or invest myself in investigating what that default mode is. That's one way to look at it. Sometimes it's like, well, maybe I investigate the default mode, maybe it's working okay for me. Or do I investigate that default mode, decide to override that default setting, and choose something different? Because we all have the power to choose. To stop living in default mode and start living on purpose is the way I'm terming that for myself. To make conscious choices about what I really want. Where do I really want to go? What do I really want to create in my life and contribute to the world, and be conscious about that and to be purposeful about that. And I think that's our opportunity. It's my opportunity for what I'm looking at now. If you read my blog this week, you heard that I'm also now working with a life coach in helping me to determine what those default modes might be and how I might want to make some different choices around that. I need to take this off. I should have known better. So what does it mean to live on purpose? Well, I have a bias about living on purpose because I believe that our purpose, my purpose, your purpose, ultimately, is to recognize and to realize and to express the power and the potential within us. In unity, when we talk about divine will or God's will or any of those ideas, what we're talking about is an overarching will for us, individually and collectively, to recognize the potential that lies within us, the power that we have access to in every moment, to create the lives that we choose to create and co-create the world that we choose to create. We all have that innate power and ability, and we all have the power to make conscious choices to access that. And what we teach in Unity is about making that conscious, recognizing we are not victims of anything, anyone, any situation, that we make it conscious that we have the power to choose. And then more than just recognizing it intellectually or making it a conscious knowing, it's also about realizing that truth, making it a part of our consciousness at a deeper level, where we feel the truth of it, not just know it up here, not just believe it up here, but to know it at a very deep, real level. To recognize the power of God, the power of the universe, the power of life, the power of love, the power, whatever you choose to call that power, it doesn't really matter to it, it matters to you what you call it. But to recognize that and to realize that, and then even more than that, is to live that, to be that in the world, to express it through our actions, through our words, through our thoughts, in our relationships. And together, when we do that, individually we do it, and then collectively we come together in that awareness, in that power, in that presence, in the allness that is that within us. We, centered in that knowing, I believe, co-create a world that works for us and for everyone. And so my bias is that is our purpose. Really is to bring the consciousness of that, to bring, if you like, the consciousness of heaven, which is the truth, knowing the truth, to the earth, into manifested form. How each of us does that is unique to us. Because there are probably 150 people here today. We all have different life experiences. We're born to different families, to different cultures. And we have been experiencing to where we are right now in our lives. We've had different life experiences that have shaped us, that have gotten us where we are. So we bring everything that we are to now. We're unique, wonderful, magical, mystical, perfect beings, perfectly imperfect beings. And we all bring something different to the world, something unique that only you can bring, that only I can bring. So how we live our purpose is different. But I think it's important that we connect with that purpose, to create our own conscious understanding of what is our purpose individually as we hold that idea of our collective purpose. And so I think one of the things that sometimes Jay does in his NDC classes as an icebreaker is to have people go around and complete this sentence that says, I would like to live in a world where. I would like to live in a world where. How would you complete that sentence? I would like to live in a world where there is peace. I would like to live in a world where everyone has enough. I would like to live in a world where people are compassionate, people are connecting, people are open, people know their unity, people know their oneness, whatever that is for you. I would like to live in a world where. And then connect with and what I am most passionate about and what I can bring to that world that I want to live in is what? What's important to me? What speaks to me in the depth of my being that's unique? It may be the same as someone else, but you're going to express it uniquely. What is important to you? What value do you hold? And the third part of that is then what actions can I take to live into what's important to me, what I value? And so those are some questions that we can ask ourselves. And when we get some clarity on that, it helps us to find our purpose and helps us then to understand and to measure and gauge everything we do against that. Is what I'm doing right now fulfilling my purpose? Is what I'm engaged in right now helping to create the world that I want to live in? Or am I living in an old default program that I'm allowing to inform my actions? And I think those are important questions for us to ask. You know, tomorrow we celebrate Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And as I was thinking about all of this in relationship to him, I believe he was a man, a perfectly imperfect man, who lived his purpose. He lived a very real purpose because he had a dream. He had an idea about the world he wanted to live in. Where everybody can walk hand in hand. Equality, justice, nonviolence, peace for everybody. That was his world that he wanted to create. And he made some magnificent strides toward that. We're certainly not there yet. But what he contributed to that was very powerful and meaningful and lasting. So I believe he was very clear about his purpose, the world he wanted to live in, and I believe he was very clear about what he valued: freedom and justice. And those were very clear values for him. Equality. And he took very decisive action to follow that through teaching, speaking, marching. And I would say, too, that when he went to India to visit Gandhi and learn more about the nonviolence that Gandhi was engaged in, the nonviolent protests, because I believe what he recognized was that the default mode that many were engaged in was not getting us where we wanted to go. He recognized, and he said very eloquently, darkness does not cast out darkness. Hate cannot cast out hate. Well, darkness does not cast out darkness, only light can do that. Hate does not cast out hate, only love can do that. And when he adopted this new purpose of choosing love, many who are engaged in the civil rights movement were not happy with him. They thought that was not going to work. But he questioned the default setting. And he chose something different. He chose love. And he chose to act nonviolently from that place of love. And so I believe he is an example for us of somebody who truly lived his dream, his purpose, his values, and stood in the truth that love is the only thing that is really going to heal. And so he's a good example for us of living on purpose. Living on purpose. And I think it's important for us, what we're doing collectively in this community is investigating that for ourselves. You know, we're engaged in these conversations. We're engaged in finding out where we're going, what we're doing. We're investigating our own default settings. Have we gotten into some things that are working. Maybe they're working, maybe they're not working. Again, sometimes you investigate your default mode, your setting, and you realize it's working fine. Sometimes you investigate your default setting, you realize, well, it just needs a little tweak, a little update, like you do on your computer, and sometimes it needs a total override. And so I think that's where we are, and I know that's where we are, and I think that's an opportunity for us individually as well. So I want to tell you that I am going to be facilitating on February 10th, after service, beginning at noon, for 2.5 hours, a session where I will lead us, anyone who wants to be a part of that, individually through creating a purpose statement. If you'd like to be a part of that, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. I'd also like to invite you to put on your calendar that on April 13th, as a community, we are going to be invited to spend a day with a facilitator who will help us once again review our core values, our mission statement, our vision statement as a center, so that we can collectively agree on what our purpose is. What are we moving into? And truly make a decision to live on purpose. So I invite us into that, both opportunities, and I invite us to question, are we living in our default mode, default settings in our lives? Or are we truly living on purpose?